Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here with us this morning. My name is Kristyn. I am with Rock Recovery. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Rock Recovery and really excited to be here with Monica Ostroff from MEDA, um, my colleague Izzy Johnston, Tammy McConaughey from Equip, and um, with our amazing, incredible, wonderful panelists. And so today we have Natasia James, LPC from Rock Recovery joining us. We have Dr. Melodie Simmons from Equip joining us, and we have Leslie Jordan Garcia from Liberati Wellness and from Project Heal joining us. And so welcome everyone. Happy Black History Month. We are just super, super excited to create a really incredible space to talk about care in the Black community, to talk about eating disorders in the Black community, and to hear from a variety um, of panelists with different experiences, different backgrounds, to just share their knowledge. We do have some questions lined up that we're going to kick things off with, but we really want this space to be open for you to ask your questions as well. And so what you can go ahead and do is if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. You can go ahead and as we're talking, as things come up, if you have questions, just go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. What I'll probably do is kind of sprinkle in audience questions as we're going through the list of questions that we have set up as well. But I want to kick things off with sharing the bios for our wonderful panelists today, and then open the floor up to you guys. I am you are not here to see me. And so we are going to get things started with introductions. And so this morning we have Natasia James with us. She is a wonderful colleague from Rock Recovery. Tasi, who she is lovingly known as, is a licensed professional counselor at Rock. She is serving clients in the state of Virginia, and she just has a wide breadth of experience within the mental health field. She's worked with adolescents and adults who struggle with eating disorders across a variety of levels of care. And Tasi just really works to create a space where clients can feel comfortable and feel safe to be their most authentic selves. She's passionate about creating inclusive spaces and providing access to high quality care for underserved communities. So thank you, Tasi, for being here today. We also have with us Leslie Jordan Garcia. Leslie is a multi-certified wellness and movement professional consultant, a certified eating disorder recovery coach, and a community care facilitator at Project Heal. Her career has spanned military, public health, education, nonprofit, and is rooted in the belief that all people are deserving of a life of agency, self-determination, and joy. She also has a private practice, Liberati Wellness, where she provides eating disorder recovery coaching and HAES-aligned personal training to help individuals find holistic well-being and gain liberation from unhelpful and oppressive food, body, and movement relationships. Leslie also works as a consultant where she provides education, partners with businesses, and helps them create health practices that embed social justice principles in their work. So excited to have you with us this morning, Leslie. Thank you for being here. And last but of course not least, we have Dr. Simmons, who is joining us from Arizona very early. Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons, for being here with us today. Dr. Melodie Simmons is a licensed professional counselor and certified eating disorder specialist who has a deep commitment to guiding individuals and families through the complexities of eating disorder recovery. As an expert in family-based treatment at Equip, she integrates evidence-based strategies with compassionate, family-centered care to support lasting healing. Dr. Simmons is dedicated to equipping both patients and clinicians with the tools necessary for sustainable recovery, ensuring that no one faces the challenges of recovery alone. So thank you guys all for being here today. And again, I just want to thank MEDA, Project Heal, and Equip for their partnership in pulling together this event. So first, to kick things off, I'm always curious about this because eating disorders is such a specialized field, even within mental health. I'd love to hear just what inspired you to pursue a career in the field of eating disorders, and anyone can jump in and feel free.
Well, good morning, you all. Thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and kick us off. And so for me, what inspired me was that I actually used to model professionally. I did runway, high fashion, and then also some commercial print work. And then I think some particular instances that really stand out to me. I was on set with this commercial, and it was a national brand, and it was a food commercial. And so there were these buckets, and nobody would eat the food. And so people would like spit out the food. People were getting sick, and nobody ate. And then also just thinking about for some of these runway shows, they would have so much of like the best food, and no one would eat the food. And so I thought, there's a problem here. And so that's really what sparked my interest.
I'm happy to go next. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy that everyone's here, including myself. Um, well, for me, it was kind of like I wanted a change in my career within the mental health. And so a friend and a former colleague of mine, she was working at a higher level of care clinic, which was eating disorders. She's also a Black clinician. And she was like, "Hey, I know you're looking for a job. Come over here." She's like, "I'm not gonna lie, it's eating disorders." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know nothing about that." But okay, I'll try it. So I spoke to the hiring manager and I will never forget. She was like, you have to be ready for this. She's like, I've worked in alcohol, I worked in substance use, I've worked in gambling, I've worked with it all. She said, nothing is as scary as eating disorders. Are you ready? And I was like, you know what? Challenge accepted. Yeah, let's do this. Let's try this. And she was absolutely right. It was intimidating. It was scary. However, I knew what she meant when she said, even though it's all these things, you're never going to want to leave. You're going to want to stay. It's just such a complex, you know, community to work in. However, you just always are wanting to learn, always wanting to help. And so I've stayed since then, and I don't think I'm going anywhere. So.
That leaves me. Good morning, everyone. As I'm bracing for a freeze in Texas, we're not used to it. Today it'll be 75, tomorrow it'll be 30. So just send some positive, warm vibes my way. I am a tropical girl for real. What brought me to eating disorders is probably more personal. Both of my parents struggled with type 2 diabetes, and watching their relationship with food and then noticing things about my own, but I didn't have the words or language to really describe what I was struggling with, because in Black communities, you don't get eating disorders. So at least that was what I grew up. That's very much what my parents subscribed to, like figure it out, nothing's wrong. And so for years of struggling with that, I felt like I was struggling alone. And when I went to grad school, I began treatment. And then so I added on a second master's of public health, with the idea that I could help people specifically with diabetes really work on their relationships with their bodies and food and chronic illness. And so my work came from diabetes care. And then I was just like, maybe it's just the food piece, like how integral that is to the Black culture and into my life personally, and really working just on those food and body relationships. And I'm like, Tasi, like I'm here, never going anywhere, because it's so integral to day living.
Thank you. Yes, and it's so important, and it's so important to have providers like you all who can pull from their own personal experiences and pull from very educational backgrounds to be in this field supporting families and individuals who are going through this. I want to jump into some of the barriers, right? Because that is the name of this event. We are breaking barriers. We are talking about things that Leslie, you so perfectly like times I've heard Black people don't get eating disorders. The amount of times I've been laughed at, like, what are you talking about? And so I want to talk about why we are not getting help, why this isn't talked about in our communities. And so, what are some of, and I know you probably can't list them all, but what are some of the unique barriers that you've seen, barriers that are uniquely impacting Black individuals and Black families that you are personally providing care for? Leslie, do you want to kick us off with this question?
Sure, I'll jump in. One of the things I see a lot of is the juxtaposition of mainstream culture that centers whiteness and thinness as a secondary trait versus this idea that of a more voluptuous desired figure in the Black culture. So if you're in between or a certain size, it's assumed that that's okay culturally because it doesn't necessarily decrease your desirability. Like I feel like so much of this is rooted in our desire for productivity, and producing also means reproducing. So desirability and that body image is a high piece of that. Other barriers that I honestly see um, comes from a distrust from the Black community when it comes to medical professionals, that those histories, those legacies is still negative, and it still really negatively impacts culturally speaking a willingness to learn more about it or believe that that's the case or true or relevant to Black culture. And then from the other side, from the medical or healthcare side, I still see a lot of dismissal when people are trying to articulate about their struggles. They're not believed, especially if they're like me, in a curvier body and a heavier body. It's still believed that no, you need to get your BMI down. You need to just buckle down. You don't have the willpower. You need to do other things. And that piece that caring for my body only is relevant when it's smaller is really a mental health barrier, and it just taxes people in this culture, I think, just disproportionately.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Leslie. I also just want to add to what you had shared just about like our own colloquialisms within our language. And so a lot of things are said as like casual and joking and, not meaning to cause harm, but it really does. It really minimizes and normalizes like eating disorder behaviors, like thinking of some sayings growing up, like, oh, that baby eating good, or ain't nobody want a bone but a dog, right? Like, oh, she eats like a bird. It's a sin to waste food. She's always got a plate somewhere. And so even within our own communities, we have some work to do. Also thinking about some things that stand out to me when I do have people like me that go to these eating disorder treatment facilities. It's like, I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to have to explain myself. I don't have to explain what a protective style is or why I'm wearing, a bonnet at night or the butters or oiling my scalp or some of these things that we do. We don't want to have to explain ourselves to other people. And even in thinking about how we show up in like group settings. And so now do I have to like manage my emotions? Do I have to code switch when I'm in these facilities? So those are some other barriers that I've seen also that have impacted us from getting care.
Yes, definitely want to piggyback off of what you said, Dr. Simmons. Especially working in higher level of care. I think for the time that I was there, I might have worked with only two Black clients there, and it was the same, the same fears that they had, like how do I fit in the space and not feel I already feel othered because I'm a Black woman or a Black person with the eating disorder, but now I got to feel othered in this space because food is such a staple within our culture. It's tradition, it's it's how we come together. It's community. It's even language. For example, your mom don't never apologize. She said, I cooked your favorite meal. Come in there. That's her way of saying sorry. It's like all these things for us. And so how do you explain that in this space where other, people might not understand? So I think I've definitely noticed that since working here, just like how do I include myself or show up for others? How are they going to understand my battles with food? And I think furthermore is just it's not often talked about in Black spaces, even in the mental health field, in the medical field. I think, Leslie, you even, said that too. Um, when I went to college, it wasn't even talked about in classes. We might talked about, other forms of mental health, but even at my school, and I went to a PWI, a predominantly white school, and it wasn't even all the way discussed. So I just don't think there's a lot of, language or understanding about it. So I think that's also a barrier.
Yeah, thank you for that insight, especially I think the higher level of care and thinking about, like you said, even beyond just the tackling the eating disorder itself, but then all of the cultural things that are just a natural part of who we are, like that I never even thought about that. So that is just a new perspective for me. Um, Leslie, you talked a little bit about your lived experience and in accessing care. And I know at Project Heal, you work in facilitating care in their spaces as well. And so what what has your experience been accessing care for eating disorders? Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Um, Sure. So for me, from my personal background, like I have been in recovery for a binge eating disorder, which is what it's now called. When I first started accessing treatment, it was part of a study. It had not been added to the DSM yet, because this would have been prior to 2013. So it's been a long time back when it was called compulsive overeating, real jazzy name. So that name in itself, right, carries a stigma, like some kind of way I thought that I didn't have control and that I was just going to be stuck in this long restriction period and then followed by this binge eating that I couldn't quite name. And so much of the treatment that I did receive once I actually fought fought to get treatment, once I received it, it was always almost always about reducing my weight, um, or it was about managing emotions. And what I was fortunate enough to discover was that it wasn't just about my emotions, it was also about the way systems of oppression affected the things that I was doing, about the way I felt hyper surveilled or policed at my in my academic settings. The way if I ate at my desk, I was always hearing whispers about when does she work, but if I didn't eat, when does she eat? Like it was just like this hyper surveilling that really affected my mental health. And I was struggling with ways to cope with that. Like my parents grew up and were segregated. So sometimes talking about this with my parents, they're just like, girl, your racial struggles aren't anything like compared to ours. And they didn't mean to be dismissive. They just thought that we were living in a different space. And in a lot of times we really weren't. So that was a big part for me. So I was always just told just exercise more and make healthier choices. But as a broke college student, access to these healthier foods and money wasn't never really addressed. And some of those other pieces I think that disproportionately affects us. So for me, that was definitely a big part of the fight that I had. And I also felt like the care that I was receiving, like I made it 2 days in a higher, like in in-person treatment. There wasn't shampoo that I could use on my natural hair. Like everything that I loved to eat and thought was nourishing to my spirit as well as my body was taboo. No collard greens, with like just it just was just so not set up for me, and I didn't feel like I was going to be successful at that level of care. And so through time, these are just some of the things that I really had to fight through and piece together some other forms of support outside of this traditional treatment framework. And so that's just a little bit of part of what I do for Project Heal. Like I actually facilitate a BIPOC only eating disorder group, like because there's some of the things like Dr. Simmons and Natasia both spoke to about being able to articulate what you need to articulate without having to give a backstory for every little single thing is so important to us actually getting to the root causes and building the skills that'll help us.
Yeah, and man, I'm thank you for sharing all of that about your experience. And I'm so stuck on the one statement that you made where it's like you went into this space and it's so clear, oh, they didn't think about me. I wasn't thought about when they thought about who would come, it wasn't me. And what message that is communicating. And I think that's so for providers who are offering care to individuals and who have a desire to be inclusive and to serve people of all backgrounds. It's thinking about that. Who are you thinking about coming into your space? Who is your space designed for? Um, and so, Dr. Simmons, I know you work with a lot of families as well and work with a lot of individuals in the care that you provide at Equip. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more from you about what are some of the concerns that when you have Black families coming to you and Black individuals coming to you, what concerns are they voicing in accessing care?
Yeah, definitely that stigma. There is a stigma around receiving treatment. I think that when we hear that eating disorder voice confirmed, we're surprised because of those colloquial statements. We never really thought much of it. I also think hearing that people have thought that it was more of like a moral or spiritual failing rather than like a medical issue. And also like just concerns about airing family business, and then also that lack of trust in other people. And so thinking like when we're in Egypt, like who do we run to? And so oftentimes we seek treatment through others. Thinking of like older people, the elders and our families, those are people who we go to because they're seen as a source of wisdom and life experience. We may also seek guidance from our church or our pastor or our elders, who likely don't have training in eating disorders. And then also I think of like beauty shops, when we spend a lot of time, it takes a long time, for us to like get our hair done and all the things. And so we're oftentimes in a beauty shop for like hours pretty regularly. And then we're like, confiding in our hairstylist. And so really looking at like what people can do to get that, like facilities, places, how can they have that support and just like additional resources to help people? And so really like training staff on implicit bias. We all have them. And so I think of search me, know my heart, try me, know my thoughts, and see if there be any egregious way in me and lead me to the way of the everlasting. And thinking of that like cultural humility piece. And so looking at really being like quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. We really need to listen to our Black families, our Black providers, and just everyone's unique experience that shapes their journey towards that healing. And also looking at providing some referrals for with other Black providers. Really true allyship, really having that true connection. And I hear you with the meal plan, Leslie. And it's like creating that and culturally inclusive meal plan, like, being more open to the foods that we're eating, thinking of like in these facilities or even with dietitians working with people outpatient. And really just educating yourself on the cultural context of Black individuals. So thinking of just the collectivism, decision making, including extended family members.
Aussie, anything to add from your experience?
Um, in terms of working with Black families, one other thing I've come to see as like maybe a barrier to is affordability. Um, I know going, especially when we're talking about needing like a higher level of care, is crazy expensive. And a lot of providers already do not take insurance. So it's like, how do you talk? It's already like what we just talked about, the mistrust, the not knowing the language, not having full knowledge about how, eating disorders are. But then also we have to add in, okay, how do we even afford this type of care that we don't even have no knowledge about? And so just the accessibility of it, just talking with those families about how can we find financial resources to get either your child or your loved one into a care where they could, potentially work on that eating disorder. And also, like they're kind of like, well, how are they going to feel safe in this space when it's predominantly white? So it's just like it's always an added layer, And so what I definitely have to do is dismantle each of those layers with the families, like, talk about it, work through it, and how maybe we could research together, finding places that could be more inclusive, that okay, maybe they offer scholarships. I've done that so many times, like sessions. We're going to sit down. We're going to look at the finances. We're going to apply for grants. We're going to apply for scholarships. We're going to look for places that have your insurance. So even just taking those moments mean a lot for these families, because it shows like, okay, this is serious, and it matters. My child does matter because they really, or my loved one does matter. They have to feel like they matter when seeking care for this. So.
I think to piggyback off that also, like not only just lack of access, but just like accessibility. And so just thinking of, sometimes we don't have the nuclear or traditional family structure. And so, maybe, like a young adult has more responsibility, like within the family and maybe some other children. And so it's like, no, I just can't, go to this PHP in the afternoon because I need to pick up my younger siblings. And so really just the access where we're able to really meet people where they are and supporting them, not trying to have them fit in our program. So just the access is huge as well.
And I just want to also say, like, as a person who, my mother was a nurse, like, and we never talked about eating disorders. Like, that was just something culturally, but also like the onus of learning isn't all all on the Black community to do. Like, I think about my childhood and the movie, the Karen Carpenter story, and that kind of told about her. Anybody, oh, don't let this coverage of the gray hair fool you. Like, if you were old enough to remember that movie, it was very clear that white, affluent, like we talk about now, the swag, right? Single white, affluent girls and women were the ones who struggled with this, and her battle was particularly with anorexia nervosa. But we don't have any like movies or media that would be culturally watched that are talking about eating disorders. Like our last year, Dove started a campaign, just not gonna, and it had a glimpse of a Black person, and then immediately when it started talking about care, it was a thin white girl. Like, it just doesn't seem to transcend any of the messaging, marketing, like vehicles don't seem to transcend and really show that this is something that doesn't discriminate on based on gender or race. Like, getting some of those pieces more mainstream, I think, is really important to really opening up the minds in the community. Like, oh, this is something we need to talk about, and it certainly isn't talked about. Like how eating disorders are the second most deadly of the mental health issue. Like, I just don't think the perspective is the same, and we're still struggling to disseminate this information throughout the culture so that it becomes part of a cultural conversation and awareness about them too as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're all hitting on so many important, like I just the Dr. Simmons, you really dove into that importance of the community piece. That's just so central to accessing care, especially within eating disorders. And Tasi, you did the same thing in talking about even just how you're working with clients, and Leslie with the representation piece. Like, it's so important within eating disorders in general because it's isolating, right? There's a lot of shame. There's this desire to hide because you feel like, okay, there's something wrong with me. Like, but it's in that isolation that it really flourishes, that your disorder really takes over. And we've seen that over the last couple of years as people have become more isolated. And so I really want to highlight that. And your point too, Leslie, of like, um, this is not just on Black families and Black individuals to do the learning for themselves, but for us as a community to also help equip these families and these individuals and just centers in general to like learn, like how do we do what we need to do to really support these people to get them the care they need, to get the information out there. I always think of the study that talks about like when you had excuse me, with three individuals that were showing the same exact symptoms. The Black individual was 50% less likely to even see that there, like, for it to even be recognized that there was an eating disorder with the same exact symptoms as two other individuals. That is a problem. Um, so I really appreciate what you guys are sharing this morning. I want to dive into a couple of questions that I've seen come through the chat. So the first one is there any research for using FBT for binge eating disorder?
I can say at Equip, we definitely use the FBT framework for BED, and we actually have really good outcomes. It is something that we are, looking at continuing to do research, but it has shown, efficacy with the BED population.
Thank you. Um, The second question, and it actually looks like a couple people are popping in the chat to answer this one. So if there's anything to add, but you guys talked about the access piece and the resources and just how expensive care can be. And so what grants are available for eating disorders treatment? I know Project HEAL was mentioned, and they offer scholarships and financial assistance. Someone mentioned Withal as a good resource. So are there any other options that immediately come to mind?
Yes, I recently found out about Love Foundation or Loveland Foundation, I'm sorry. Yes, it is specifically geared to Black women and Black girls. They provide scholarship for mental health care, not specifically for eating disorder, but they provide grants and funding for access to care. So they'll pay for the co-pays or for sessions and all that. So I sent Kristyn the link to share to everybody at the end, but I sounds like it has favorable reviews and it sounds like a great thing for young women to look into, all women, Black women to look into to get their care, um, paid for. So.
Yes, and I am going to, we'll send a follow-up email with some of the resources that were mentioned, and that will be in that email as well. Um,
I also just wanted to say, like, if you see like some of the eating disorder conferences that are being hosted by organizations, like some of those small organizations are usually nonprofits, like I'm a part of one, and we will provide scholarships for treatment. So they may not be the bigger grants, but we have sliding scale providers and free treatment, or we'll cover the cost of treatments like via scholarships, like some of these groups. So that's another way, like more locally, to look at resources for funding financial assistance.
Thank you, Leslie. So another question that we had come up in the chat, it says, I'm curious how the role of neurodivergent shows up for clinicians when supporting clients through disordered eating, especially those who are or underdiagnosed, who are searching for why they might eat differently.
I think I can definitely say it absolutely shows up. I'm thinking of RFID in particular, avoided restrictive food intake disorder. And so, really, I think it's up to the clinician to really get curious, ask questions, start with curiosity to understand that individual. But yes, absolutely, it shows up.
We can also try to provide some resources for that as well in that follow-up email. Um, I want to talk about supporting Black providers as well, and those who are working in a field where they, I think it was said perfectly, where they're very clearly not the majority, as there's, certainly not enough representation. But before we dive into that, there is a good question that came through the chat, which kind of popped into my mind when we were talking about media and social media and the amount of like big back videos that I now see coming up on my feed. And so this person shared, how do you advise families to work proactively to counter some of these colloquialisms and media standards, especially with kids and adolescents who are on their phone, who are seeing this stuff, who are hearing it in school? How do we work with these families to shut down some of those trends that we see? Natasia, you want to kick us off with this question?
Yes, you saw my face thinking. I have my think face on. Um, and that I will say this. I know we're definitely working with a generation that also talks about like no body shaming, but in the same hand, they like, do the body shaming and all that. I, as a person who is in a larger body, I think talking to our children and making sure that they understand that being called, I think the word fat has been very, very demonized and has been used as a way to attack somebody. I call myself fat. I'm like, because I am fat, but I think the way that we communicate to our children to not use these as attacks and the way as to demonize people for their body. So the big back trend is kind of like one of those like, okay, are they using it as an attack of a body? Yes, that is happening. And there's also some people who are like praising it, like, yes, I am a proud big back. So it's like one of those that's like conflicting. It's like, how do you work through that? So how do we teach our kids to not use body as a way you know, to attack somebody to as a way to demonize them or to say that their body is bad because they have a big back. Because having a big back, I literally have a big back. I'm literally shaped that way. It's not a bad thing. However, I understand in these places, in these spaces, with the trends and stuff, they do demonize it and make it such a bad. So just really talking about how all bodies really do matter. Anybody does matter, and that we do our best to not use it as a way to create harm, you know. Even for those who are in smaller frames, not using those to attack somebody for being in a smaller frame. It's a big, long conversation that I feel like we would have to have. That's like a separate panel of its own. Just talking about the history of Black bodies and how it was just such and during enslavement, how it's just so, used against us. So that's just like a whole thing to talk about. But in terms of with your children, just really letting them know, like, we cannot try to harm people because of base of how they look. So if we're gonna say we have a big back, all right, let's praise it. Because this is our body, this is our build, but also we're not gonna say it as a way to like attack somebody and be mean and nasty. So
Yeah, I also just want to piggyback off that in that, like, in our culture, we do joke a lot. And I think that sometimes when somebody hears it or they don't understand our culture, then it's taken out of context and now it's made a certain way that it was never intended for. And I am a Breakfast Club fan. And so I do know that, like, Charlemagne the God really kind of talked a little bit about that and that, like, this is our culture, and then people hear this and then they take it out of context. And so I think that's also just something to consider just when it comes to the big backs and just some of the language that we use as joking. But then I also think that we have work to do within our culture because we have this language of like joking that actually is now becoming more like harmful, and even within our own culture people are finding it harmful. So just a lot of work to do both ways.
I was going to say, as a parent of a couple of kids, but the youngest one is 12, and she's in a chubbier body. She has Down syndrome. And so there's a lot of conversation. So we have just raised her not to comment on people's bodies, whether you're joking or not. So if you want to give someone a compliment, we really model for her commenting about someone's character. Oh, you're really kind. You're this. I really like your smile, or I'm happy to see your face, things like that. And it has made like a big difference because she also doesn't sometimes get the nuance of jokes when something is said to her. So not everyone has the ability to understand what a joke is or the difference, right? So we really try to raise her and we model that. Just we don't comment on people's bodies, bad or good. So we really try to make sure that our conversations around someone's characters or actions, right? Things that we can change. And I love that coming from elementary education. If a person can't change it in 30 seconds or less, there's really no sense in commenting on it. So like, yeah, love your big back because it's not going to change in 30 seconds. So there's no point in commenting on it. We just move on to things that we actually can influence or change in a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you guys. I think all of that context is really helpful. And the point of I think who the message is coming from was brought up at one point, and I think that is really important to think about as well. Um, I want to, there are so many good questions pouring in, but I want to get to this next question talking about Black providers. And so anyone can jump in on this one, but what what support or resources can or excuse me, what are some of the ways you believe that the eating disorder field as a whole can better support and elevate the needs of Black providers within the field? We talked a little bit about how there is not enough representation within this field. I know we get referrals, and I'm like, especially like with a dietitian, man, I'm scrambling to find referrals for Black dietitians. And so what can we as a field do to let, especially, providers coming into the field know that this field is for them, that is a space that was created with them in mind?
As somebody that did go to an HBCU, I don't know if anyone on the call went to Jackson State University, go Tigers, in Jackson, Mississippi. But, I would really love for organizations to go out and actually like actively recruit people, particularly in HBCUs. I'm thinking of when I was there. Big pharma was there, tech companies were there. There were so many people like actively recruiting and not eating disorders. And so I think that is something definitely where we could start. Also, just making sure that the recruiter is like a BIPOC or a Black person as well. I think that's so important because then people are likely to go to that table or have those conversations with other people. Because I think we need, well, I know we need to see ourselves reflected in the field. And also thinking about these organizations with their leadership. And so even thinking of like high level leadership, even if you look around, there's not many of us in high level leadership. And so definitely more representation. And then I think too, when we get Black providers, we need to keep them. And I think retention is huge. So I've been in the field since 2008 and really have seen Black providers come and go. And typically it's very, very quick. And so again, making space where people are like psychologically safe, making sure that we are having these conversations, talking about the microaggression and the things that occur. It's funny, even thinking about myself and code switching. And so my hair's up today, but normally it's down and it's pretty big and it's very curly. And I remember when I got into leadership and eating disorders, I would straighten my hair because obviously I'm brown. And so, okay, you're obviously different. I'm actually very tall. I'm like 5'10". And so that's another thing. And I'm like, the last thing I need is for somebody to be like, oh gosh, and look at her hair. And so really just more representation for sure. Then also thinking about the research that's happening in the field. Are we having, diverse people in these samples, and really looking at our evidence-based treatment modalities and, maybe making some adaptations, maybe doing some new work and some new studies to really include some of that historical trauma, abuse, more of that cultural context and cultural lens.
Yes, I also want to add that um, in terms of leadership, Dr. Simmons, you said it, like especially in these places like the higher level of care, clinics and things like that, and creating something that allows for marginalized groups to meet. For example, I'll just say like I used to work at Center for Discovery, and one of the things that I really appreciated from them is that they had somebody who a clinician or somebody in outreach having ahead of something. There was an LGBTQ group, a Hispanic group. It was for Black clinicians, all of that. And I think that was just such an important thing to have, where it was all clinician led and it was all volunteering, but it was just a space for each individual or each, community to have, and not only to go and be able to talk freely and have space to share, but also become more informed. Granted, I understand that we worked at Center for Discovery and you had to work there in order to have access to that. But if more even just clinics that even aren't, eating disorder oriented, just having those spaces for clinicians to me is very, very important. Also, I just want to know, and this might be more with the with the resources part, but there are conferences out here that are specifically geared to BIPOC communities. I went to one of the BIPOC conference last summer. It's on the top of my mind. I'm so bad at remembering. Please, if y'all know it, please put it in the chat. But there are conferences here that are specifically geared to BIPOC communities that talk about eating disorders and how to work with these individuals and just different modalities and things like that. And then the last note from my non-Black providers, this if there are any here, I really want to encourage you to become very, very educated on all groups. So we're talking about Black people here, but really becoming educated on how to work in Black spaces. To create a type of comfort for Black clients that will come. There are other resources, like I think it's called inclusivetherapist.com, where you could find a therapist who might be Black or non-Black, but they know how to work with all communities and to create a safe space. So I think like it's really important that non-Black providers know all types of communities they work with.
I just wanted to add, I think one of the barriers is honestly like I'm gonna go back to finances. Like I just think that again, I mean, those who are dietitians especially, like there's a high cost you pay for your internship. Like there's just so many barriers like that are born of systems of oppression. It deters. And then like you say, the I think that there should be more collaboration with Black-led organizations that can maybe help facilitate that funnel right into the eating disorder field. And I did, and so did Christina, put in that BIPOC eating disorders conference hosted by Dr. Whitney Trotter and Angela Dones. It'll be in person this year in Houston. This will be their first in person conference. It's usually virtual. Um, I just also wanted to say, Arise. Arise holds a BIPOC clinician space, like just networking and support kind of space that I attend every other month. I think that's really important, like what both of you, Tassie and Dr. Simmons, talking about, just being able to troubleshoot, bounce off, and support because it's tough when you're the only one or you're always the person talking about systems of oppression and no one else seems to be really understanding what that means or what that equates to when you're dealing with Black families or even people from other communities. So being able to have that space, it does increase longevity in the field, but it also creates community and it feels a lot less lonely because eating disorders are isolating. Being a Black provider in this space is also isolating. So it's really nice to have that community, not just for the patients, but also for the clinicians.
Thank you all. And yeah, Leslie, thank you for sharing that group that Arise does, because I was going to mention that. And if you're on the call and you know of other resources where people can tap in for support, whether it's a free supervision group or a networking space or anything like that, regional, national, feel free to go ahead and drop it in the chat. Um, I believe with the Arise group as well, they have a spreadsheet that includes a list of Black providers around the nation that work with eating disorders and are a part of that group. Another thing, and I feel like I just have to say this because this has just been like all morning I've been thinking about this. We're sharing some really great resources, but I want to leave the gentle reminder that BIPOC and Black are not the same thing. And they're often grouped together. Even within this month, I've seen like Black History Month. Here are a bunch of BIPOC resources, and I get it. The inclusivity, it's wonderful, and it's taking away from amplifying the voices and the needs of the people that are being affected. And I'm like, that has just been sitting on my heart all morning. And so I want to leave that as a gentle reminder as we are sharing these resources and as we're, marketing with treatment things and in doing some learning for ourselves. Black and BIPOC are not the same thing. Hispanic and BIPOC are not the same thing. Asian BIPOC, it's not the same thing. So do the individual learning for yourself. Learn about these communities for yourself because they're not the same. I just had to get on my soapbox for a minute.
You're really spot on, Kristyn, and that just this very telling of what is actually available to us solely.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. Let's be very clear. It's amazing that there's just even resources out for BIPOC, individual for the community. But you're spot on that it's just really limited for just solely Black community. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I thank you for pointing that out, Tasi, because again, the point is not like this is not about the resources that we're sharing or that there's any issue with those resources. It highlights the limitation to resources that are truly designed for Black individuals. Um, so thank you for pointing that out. There was another question that I saw that I think is important to touch on, and I know we're getting towards the end of time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Um, Someone asked, in thinking about seeking counseling for mental health, is it recommended that someone pursue counseling for eating disorders separate from counseling for other issues? For example, abandonment, PTSD, maybe depression, anxiety. It can seem like, and they're often interconnected, but is it important to seek separate treatment for these issues?
I mean, I'm going to say yes, only because if you think of your primary care, if you have, I don't know, high blood pressure, sure, your primary care can manage your hypertension, but wouldn't you maybe want to see a cardiologist to really get more of that specialized care, somebody that's really put in the work to do like a deeper dive study? And so I think it would be very important to have that specialist. And oftentimes too, if you are going through insurance, if your clinician's treating two separate things, then likely insurance will cover those two separate things. And so definitely seek the specialist.
yeah, and not all general clinicians have, the basic knowledge of how to work with individuals who have disordered eating. So, just to piggyback off of what Dr. Simmons says, it is a specialty. So I definitely recommend that you get that individualized care specifically for that, because there's a lot of things that come with it, not only the mental health part, but okay, how do we get the routine of making sure we do feed ourselves, or just having like, a schedule of eating. So it's more practices in that, like that we do other than just like talking about maybe the trauma of food or the relationship with our body and stuff. Sometimes I have to sit with my clients and we're going to have lunch together. And I'm going to pay attention to how you're having lunch. So, it's definitely takes a special, a provider who has this specialty as their, in their experience.
Leslie, anything you wanted to add to that? Awesome. Um, yeah, the specialist is really, really important. And I think Dr. Simmons, you said it perfectly with like wouldn't you wouldn't be having an issue with your heart and just see your primary care provider. You'd be referred to a cardiologist. So, we want to look at our mental health in the same scope. Um, I think last question, because again, I really, really want to be respectful of people's time here. But what, as we had this incredible conversation, and again, I just thank you each for your time today, for your expertise, for sharing your experiences in this space. I want to thank everyone who joined and for the amazing questions that were asked. What is the one thing that you really hope attendees are able to walk away with from this panel today?
I'll go first. I really hope that, just piggybacking on what you were saying, Kristyn, about, there are unique intersections for Black people that don't exist. There are unique intersections that also means there are unique barriers. So I would probably want people, to walk away, especially the non-Black providers, like asking yourself the question, what are you doing to make eating disorder treatment more accessible, identity affirming, and inclusive for your Black clients? And this is a real question because I think that sometimes the best thing or the to do that, we need to refer to Black clinicians or Black practitioners. I don't think that happens enough. I think that people want to take a course and really step in. And I just think that if you're really looking at your clients, you should be looking at your Black colleagues as well and figuring out how to make this more accessible for everyone involved. So I think that's what I would want people to walk away from, is that question that they can mull over and really be self-reflective about what they're doing for not just the Black clients, but for their Black colleagues as well.
I really hope that everybody who's leaving here leaves a little bit more curious. Um, because with curiosity, it comes where, okay, I want to look more into this. I want to research more, but I want to get some questions answered. So I really hope that no matter if you're a provider or somebody who's also struggling with disordered eating, wherever you are on the spectrum here, I really hope you leave with a sense of curiosity to really, really dive into, you know, how we need to have these conversations in Black spaces about eating, about food, about our bodies, about all of that, and outreach, having challenging yourself to really have outreach in some of these places and talk about it, even if it's difficult, even if you might not always know the language, but just say like, hey, have you heard about this? I learned this during this panel today. What do you think about that? Even if it's just as simple as like, going to your barber and saying like, hey, I learned this today. Let's have a conversation. So really leave here with some curiosity and just challenge yourself to, really have that outreach and go out there and talk about it.
Yeah, I love that you said the curiosity. And so I think that really we need to be the salt and the light. And so thinking about salt. And so, you all are here. And so let's enhance, let's preserve what we know and what we have, and bringing out the best in whatever we touch, because we truly have the power to bring out the best in this field by embracing the different voices and the different perspectives. And then also thinking of being that light. And so really illuminating things that are in the dark, shining away and illuminating that path forward so that we can change lives.
Thank you all. This was so wonderful. Um, there's one more question that we wanted to tackle. And I understand if some people might have to drop off due to time, but it's a research question, so I want to make sure we want to get to it. Um, why why is the prevalence of binge purge behaviors higher in Black female teens compared to their white counterparts? And any thoughts on that? That's one of the stats that we often see. Um, so any thoughts that you all have on that statistic in particular?
I literally just typed a response to this question. I actually think that bias about body size and BMI factors really play a big part in this. Me and a couple of other researchers are actually doing a meta Dallas review of this particular statistic, because I feel like we suspect, like our hypothesis is, if you are in a Black body, you are and your BMI is higher, that you're going to get this diagnosis. And it also decreases, like, a lot of times the level of care that you're able to get. Whereas a white person with every other presenting factor the same, except for BMI, will get a different diagnosis, which elevates the ability for them to get higher levels of care. So they're going to be diagnosed as bulimia with bulimia nervosa or atypical anorexia even more often, so that they get better care. Like, it's just the way the coding and stuff works out. But that's just our suspicion. There's a couple of us doing this research, but that's what I think. As I don't think that Black people engage in the behavior more often. I just think that it's viewed differently based on who's presenting, what body's presenting.
Thanks, Leslie. I appreciate your response to that. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining, and I want to thank everyone, Tasi, Dr. Simmons, Leslie, thank you for taking time out of your morning to share, for all the things that you touched on. Again, it's just community, culture, educating yourself, supporting Black providers, not just the individuals and families that are struggling, but those who are providing care for them. It's just so much good information. So, for everyone who joined, we did record this event. We will share the recording. We're trying to take screenshots of all the resources and follow up with you and get all the information that you can. If we didn't get to your question and it's like really pressing and you want us to try to answer it, you can send me an email. I'm the one who's been sending the Zoom links, or follow up to the email we'll send with the resources, and we'll try to get you an answer to that question. But again, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thanks to MEDA, Equip, and Project Heal for being a part of this wonderful event.